The first sound wasn't a voice. It wasn't even the scrape of a chair. It was a heavy folder slamming down onto polished wood. A sharp, dry thud that echoed off the glass walls of the boardroom like a gunshot. For a second, I swear, even the fluorescent lights above seemed to buzz louder, like nervous bees trapped in a jar. The porcelain coffee cup sitting at the edge of the table trembled. The spoon inside clinked against the rim, almost like it wanted to escape before the storm hit. And then came his voice. Cold, smooth, practiced. Every word clipped, rehearsed, deliberate, like he'd spent hours the night before saying the line in front of a mirror until it sounded just right. Effective immediately, he said, "You are terminated from your position as lead systems engineer." Just like that. 7 years of my life crushed into a single sentence. The room froze. You could hear the stillness. A ballpoint pen stopped midair. A chair creaked faintly as someone shifted and then sat rigid again. Board members flicked their eyes at each other, just for a heartbeat, before dropping them back to the table. Nobody wanted to get caught looking too sympathetic. Nobody wanted to be part of the blast radius. And me? I looked straight at him. At the new CEO, Jonathan Price, the so-called savior of Helios Systems. Navy suit, crisp lines, red tie so tight it looked like it might choke the pulse out of his neck. He sat there with that smug grin plastered across his face, a grin that didn't quite hide the flicker of insecurity in his eyes. I'd seen plenty of bosses in my life, but this one looked less like a leader and more like a spoiled kid who had just snatched a juice box out of someone else's hand. My heart pounded. My ears rang with the rush of blood. 7 years flashed through my mind in an instant, nights curled up at my keyboard, missing my mother's 70th birthday because I couldn't leave the lab, eating cup noodles in the dark with nothing but the flicker of server screens to keep me company. All of it reduced to one cold, polished line. But I didn't give him what he wanted. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I didn't curse. That's what he expected. He wanted to humiliate me one last time. Instead, I closed the folder in front of me, stacked the papers neatly, and stood up. My back straighter than it had ever been. My voice calm. My words simple. Thank you. 2 words. That's all I gave him. I saw eyebrows rise. Chairs shifted. Confusion rippled across the room like a sudden chill. Some of them frowned, like they'd just watched me swallow an ice cube whole. Jonathan stayed stiff, his smirk fixed, but I caught it. A tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. A narrowing of his eyes. He didn't like that. Because my thank you unsettled him more than a meltdown ever could. And here's the part they didn't know. I had prepared for this moment long before it ever arrived. What happened 10 days later would stun them all. I turned and walked out. The hallway stretched long ahead of me, glass walls reflecting back the image of a woman freshly dismissed. But inside, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. Strangely, I felt lighter, like an invisible chain had just snapped off my shoulders. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside, pressed the ground floor, and watched as the polished boardroom, with all its smug faces and whispered fears, vanished behind steel doors. By the time I stepped out onto Market Street, San Francisco had already moved on. Horns blared. Exhaust fumes tangled with the smell of roasted coffee beans from the corner cafe. People hurried past me, faces buried in their phones. To the world, I was just another professional leaving a tall building. But to me, I knew. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Tell me something, have you ever been betrayed at work? Have you ever poured your whole life into something, only to be tossed aside like a used napkin? If you have, tell me in the comments. I want to know, because I've been there. That night, back in my apartment in the Mission District, I shut the door with a click that echoed too loud in the silence. For a moment, I just stood there in the dark, my chest still tight, my hands trembling slightly. Outside, the city was alive, horns, laughter, music spilling from a bar 2 blocks away. But inside, My apartment was nothing but stillness. When I finally flicked on the light, the truth stared back at me. My place didn't look like a home. It looked like a lab disguised as a living space. The dining table buried under files and contracts. Schematics stacked high, sticky notes slapped onto every corner. Coffee cups piled one on top of another, brown rings tattooed into the wood. My laptop still sat open on the edge of the table, screen frozen on the unfinished report I never got to send before my so-called execution in the boardroom that morning. I sank into my wooden chair, my body heavy, my mind empty. And then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with message after message. "Are we still allowed to keep coding?" Logan asked. "HR says we have to stop everything until further notice," Priya typed. Then Dylan, always blunt, wrote, "Guess we're disposable after all." I read each line, my chest tightening. These weren't just colleagues. These were the best engineers I'd ever led. Soldiers in the trenches with me, side by side in sleepless nights. And now they were stranded, abandoned, while the man in the red tie strutted on TV about his new era of innovation. I wanted to reply, to reassure them, to tell them I had a plan. But my fingers hovered over the keyboard and then dropped again. I couldn't. Not yet. I stood, walked over to the small cabinet in the corner, and pulled out an old photo frame. My mother, smiling gently at her birthday, the one I had missed. Another picture of me and the team, clutching greasy pizza boxes after an all-nighter, grins on our tired faces. I touched the photo lightly. My finger trembled. 7 years of sacrifice. For what? My phone rang again. This time, not a message. A call. I hesitated, then picked it up. "Honey, I just saw the news. Are you all right?" My mother's voice steady, but trembling at the edges. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, though my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Sweetheart, sometimes letting go is the greatest victory. I don't want to see you drained anymore." I closed my eyes, swallowing hard. Part of me wanted to believe her, to put it all down, to walk away. But then Jonathan's face flashed in my mind. That smirk, that careless arrogance, the way he looked at me like excess inventory. And in that moment, my restraint twisted into something else. Not anger, not despair, something sharper. Resolve. I set the phone down, walked back to the table, and pulled a box of old files from under it. Papers, contracts, legal drafts from years ago, back when the budget cuts almost killed us. My hands moved fast, flipping through page after page, my heart racing. And then I found it, buried deep in the fine print. A line most people would skim right over. In the event that the project is terminated or direct supervision is removed, full ownership and operational control of the technology shall automatically revert to the chief architect. I froze. My hand trembled. Not from fear this time, but from realization. Jonathan Price thought he had buried me. But what he really did was pull the pin on the time bomb I planted years ago. I leaned back in my chair, a slow laugh spilling out of me. The first real laugh all day. The city outside didn't care. But in that small apartment, under the glow of a desk lamp and surrounded by stacks of paper, I knew the truth. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a game he didn't even know he was playing. And 10 days later, the world would watch him lose. If this happened to you, would you stay loyal to the company or would you walk? Drop your answer in the comments. That clause, that single line in the contract glared up at me like it had been waiting all these years. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of my desk lamp catching the edge of the paper. My laugh echoed in the small apartment, quiet but sharp. 7 years of giving everything, and Jonathan thought he ended me with one sentence. He had no idea that 2 years earlier, I'd written my survival into the fine print. But here's the thing. That night when I planted this safeguard, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't luck. It was desperation. I remember it like it happened yesterday. 2 years earlier, Helios was on the brink. Finance blindsided us with a 40% budget cut. The quantum modular grid, our crown jewel, the project that had consumed our lives, was suddenly declared non-essential. That word alone nearly broke me. Non-essential? We had sacrificed birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays for this project. We had poured our souls into it, line by line, circuit by circuit. That night, the lab was silent except for the hum of servers. Everyone had gone home in defeat. Pizza boxes were still stacked in the corner, coffee cups lined the tables like fallen soldiers. I stayed, alone. I pulled every contract, every agreement, every funding document out of the filing cabinet. I spread them across the cold metal table, my hands moving faster than my thoughts. I read every clause, every line of legal jargon that the board had never bothered to read themselves. And then, pen in hand, I rewrote a section. Not to cheat, not to steal, but to protect. I wrote the words carefully steady. In the event the project is terminated or direct supervision is removed, full ownership and operational control of the technology shall automatically revert to the chief architect. That night, I became both engineer and lawyer. I tucked that safeguard deep into the stack, slipped it back into the pile of documents the executives never cared to check. When the board signed, they thought it was just another revision. They didn't see what I had buried. And I never told anyone. Not Logan. Not Priya. Not even Ethan, my deputy back then. Because I knew one day, someone like Jonathan Price would come along. Someone too arrogant to believe a woman at the table could outthink him. Someone who thought my silence meant weakness. I planted the seed for that day. And now, 2 years later, it had finally sprouted. I traced the sentence on the page with my finger. My laugh softened into a smile. You know what's crazy? Most people don't read the fine print. They click I agree on terms and conditions without a second thought. But that fine print, the words buried where no one looks, that's where the power hides. Tell me, be honest, when's the last time you actually read a contract? Or do you just skim and sign? Most people never read the fine print, do you? The next morning, I woke up late. Number 5 a.m. alarm. No morning stand-up call. No rush of emails demanding fixes. Just silence. For the first time in years, silence felt like freedom instead of punishment. I brewed coffee, the smell filling my kitchen, and turned on the TV. And there he was, Jonathan Price. He sat in a CNBC studio, gray suit pressed sharp, hair slicked down like he'd stepped out of a catalog. He looked polished, too polished. And his voice? Smooth as glass, rehearsed to perfection. Helios Systems, he told the interviewer, is entering a new era of innovation. We are moving away from dependence on individuals and into a sustainable, optimized, flexible future. This is the age of synergy, the age of streamlining, the age of optimization. Buzzwords, one after another, like a broken record stuck on corporate jargon. If you'd never built a system in your life, you might have believed him. You might have thought he was a genius. But me? I nearly spilled my coffee laughing, because every single word he said was built on a foundation I owned. The system he bragged about? The one he claimed as his new era? He didn't have the keys to it anymore. And when the time came, those keys would decide everything. I muted the TV, leaned back, and shook my head. He had no idea. He thought firing me was the end. He thought pushing me out made him stronger. He had no clue he'd just kicked the legs out from under his own empire. I whispered to myself, enjoy the cameras while they're still pointed at you. Because I knew what was coming. And if you want to know what comes next, don't just scroll past the story. Subscribe so you don't miss when this house of cards falls. Trust me, you won't want to look away. I sipped my coffee slowly, the city buzzing outside my window. For once, I wasn't rushing to save a system or scramble for deadlines. I was watching, waiting, and smiling. Because the truth was simple, Helios thought they fired me. But in reality, I had just fired them. And in less than 10 days, The world would see what happens when arrogance collides with preparation. The day of the showcase felt like movie lighting had been turned up on the city. Sun came in hot through the glass facade of Helios headquarters, bouncing off chrome turnstiles and the white marble floor like a spotlight. Inside the main hall, everything gleamed. Giant LED wall looping our logo, rows of designer chairs, investors in perfect suits flipping leather notebooks open to a blank page, ready to write down whatever buzzword made them feel early. I watched from my apartment, coffee in hand, TV volume low. I didn't need to be there to know how it smelled: fresh paint, cheap audio cables warming under stage lights, the faint tang of nerves. I could picture the staging crew whispering into headsets, the front row whispering numbers to each other. 1,000 little tells that say, "We're sure," almost. Then Jonathan strode out. He had that "I was born for this" smile pasted on, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Gray suit, red tie, same not tight enough to bruise. He raised a hand. The room obeyed. Music dipped. He planted both hands on the lucite podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice butter smooth. "Today, Helios will show you the future." I set my cup down and leaned forward. He made a big sweeping motion toward the wall of screens. The quantum modular grid isn't just a platform. It's a new era. Applause. The tepid kind that says, "We're polite. Impress us." Behind him, the dashboard booted. Graphs animated. A command line flickered to life like a starting pistol. "Live in production," he said, milking the words. Real time, not a simulation. And for 5 seconds, it did look real. Then the cursor paused. A little hiccup, barely there. The cursor blinked again and stopped. A thin gray banner slid across the screen. Not red, not dramatic, just cold. License authorization expired. The hall went silent enough to hear someone's bracelet slide along a chair arm. Jonathan's smile held, but the corners wobbled. "Looks like a minor delay," he chuckled, a touch too high. 2 minutes. 2 minutes ticked. Nothing moved. He tried again, a little tighter. Just a small environment issue. 5 minutes. The banner didn't budge. A camera cut to the first row. Eyebrows were up now. A pen clicked over and over. Anyone who has ever been in a room like that knows the sound of belief shrinking. 10 minutes. Still that same line. License authorization expired. I let the silence hang in my living room and on that stage, because I wanted you to feel what they felt in that moment. The drop. The little voice that says, "Wait, if this was real, it would work." And it didn't. I took a breath. Here's what no one in that room understood yet. They had rehearsed the demo in staging, where a temporary key let everything sing. Pretty lights, perfect graphs. But today wasn't staging. Today was production. And production needed a real key. The key that reverted with the clause. The key only I controlled. On TV, the camera cut back to Jonathan. Sweat glimmered just under the stage light at his temple. He glanced toward the side wing like he wanted someone, anyone, to fix the moment for him. Then all at once, my laptop pinged. Slack lit up like a pinball machine. "Logan was fine yesterday. Staging spun up smooth. Why is prod dead?" "Priya, because staging key is not equal to production key. That's why." Dylan, translation, we're toast. Logan again. "Anyone know who holds the prod key?" "Priya, pretty sure we did." Dylan, past tense doing some heavy lifting there. I exhaled through my nose. Even in chaos, Dylan could land a line. It didn't make this easier, but it made it human. On stage, a woman I knew well rose from the second row, our COO, the one person in the building who never wasted a word. She didn't take the mic. She didn't smile. She just lifted her tablet and spoke clearly enough for every investor and every camera to hear. "Are we saying," she asked, "that the company no longer controls the platform it is publicly demonstrating?" The words hit the hall like a dropped wrench. You don't ask that question unless you're certain. And you don't ask it in public unless you're done protecting someone's ego. Jonathan's mouth opened and closed. A sound came out that wanted to be a laugh and died on the way. "Everything is under control," he said, and the microphone squealed with feedback like the statement itself disagreed. Let me ask you something honestly. If you were sitting in that room, what would you have asked? What would you want to know right then? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious how you would have cut to the truth. Back on Slack, the engineering channels went from anxious to frantic. Ethan, my former deputy, popped up in a private thread I hadn't seen in months. "Ethan, we need to talk." I stared at the cursor for a long second, then typed 2 words. "Me? About what?" He didn't waste time. "Ethan, I'm going to try a bypass. Spoof the key long enough to get through the demo." My shoulders tightened. "Don't," I wrote back. "You'll trigger the traps." He sent a single dot, then another. "Ethan, I won't trip anything." I could almost see him, jaw set, the way he always looked when a problem insulted his pride. He had a gift for building, but pride can turn gift into blindfold. I opened a private admin console on my side, the one no one at Helios even knew existed. I watched the log like a cardiogram. Attempt number 1, synthetic token forged. Response, signature mismatch. Blocked. Attempt number 2, time skew injection. Response, nonce rejected. Blocked. Attempt number 3, shadow service spun up to impersonate licensed demon. Response, source integrity failed. Blocked. 3 tries in 3 minutes. My chest tightened anyway. Attempt number 4, credential stuffing against retired endpoints. Response, endpoint tombstoned. Blocked. Attempt number 5, man in the middle against staging pipeline. Response, staging lift refused. Blocked. His messages stopped. For 20 long seconds, nothing. Attempt number 6, brute rotate cipher on an old build. Response, hash diverged. Blocked. He was getting desperate. I typed again. "Me, Ethan. Stop." No reply. Attempt number 7, time bomb script to force a grace window. Response, tamper flag raised. Source quarantined. Access revoked. The console flashed a final line. Unauthorized escalation detected. User removed. I sat back hard, like my chair had been kicked. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something sharp and tired, like grief. He was the one I used to trust with my eyes closed. And here I was watching code shut him out like any other attacker. That's the thing about safeguards. They don't care who you used to be to each other. They only care about the truth of an action. On television, the investors were checking their watches. One stood. Another followed, phone to ear. A man in the 4th row shut his notebook without writing a single word. The camera panned left, then right, searching for a new angle and found nothing but faces going from polite to done. That's the moment you can feel a room stop believing. It doesn't shout. It goes quiet. Then my phone started humming again, this time not just Slack. Clients, partners, vendors. Subject lines like, "We're experiencing issues," and "Sandbox is unresponsive," and "Is there a license outage?" I switched tabs to public monitors. Dashboards most people don't know are public if you know where to look. Green lights began blinking amber, then red. Not just the demo environment. Dev, staging, customer sandboxes, investor testbeds. The message everywhere, across every pane. License authorization expired. This wasn't a small crack anymore. This was load-bearing. One channel pinged nonstop with screenshots. Another with copies of emails from assurance, teams trying to reassure without saying anything true. Someone pasted the first tweet that mattered. Then 10 more. Then a page of them. By the time I refreshed, a hashtag had climbed the side rail. Hashtag Helios collapse. Worldwide. Fast. I wish I could tell you I didn't feel anything. That I sat there like a statue. But I felt it. Not joy. Not revenge glitter. Just a release. The kind that happens when truth, quiet, patient truth, finally stands up in the middle of a room and says enough. On screen, A press handler rushed a handheld mic toward Jonathan. The camera worked too hard to keep him framed. The frame couldn't fix the sweat. Or the eyes. He tried to smile again. It made the room flinch. "Minor authentication conflict," he said. "We'll be back in a moment." They didn't come back in a moment. I dropped a line into the general channel, my first public message since the firing. "Me, turn off the spin. Tell the truth. The system needs the production key. You don't have it." Silence. Then dots. "Priya, I'm not saying it for them. But I'll stop lying. Logan, we own our part. We shipped brilliance on a leash. We just didn't know who held the leash. Dylan, bold of them to assume they could keep the dog after firing the handler." Even I laughed at that one, and it didn't feel good to laugh. It felt necessary. Every news site I cared to check had a header crawling across the top now. Some called it a glitch. The careful ones used outage. The sharpest ones didn't name it yet. They just showed the video of the banner on loop, that quiet, devastating line. And right here, while we're in the middle of the fall, do yourself a favor and hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. I don't say that lightly. There's a twist coming that flips everything you think you know about blame and power. Don't get caught chasing the story later. Subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard. Back in the hall, the COO, stone still, stepped toward the podium. She didn't even look at Jonathan. "Move the investors to breakout rooms," she told someone off camera. "Get legal on. Get the board in. Now." You can always tell when a company moves from theater to triage. The stage lights keep burning, but the attention leaves the stage. I muted the TV. The room felt small again. The old photos on my cabinet looked back at me, my mother's quiet smile, my team in a lab haze with pizza grease still on our fingers. For a moment, my throat got tight. Not for Helios. For the people still inside it, running from room to room with nothing to fix and everything to answer for. My console log stopped scrolling. No more attempts. Just white space and a blinking cursor. I closed the lid of my laptop and set my palms flat on the table to stop the shaking. Hurt and vindication sat next to each other like they were used to sharing chairs. The phone lit one more time. A text from an unknown number. "Board wants answers. Today." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand and breathed out slow. "Good," I said to the empty room. "Ask the right questions." Because a demo had failed, and an outage had spread, and the market was about to put a dollar figure on arrogance. But that wasn't the story. Not the whole one. The real story was simple. They thought firing me locked a door. It opened one. And the next room would be brighter than they could stand. The morning after the collapse, I thought the worst was over. The demo had failed in front of the world, the outage had spread like fire across every server they owned, and the hashtag had carved Helios into a punchline. I figured Jonathan would do what most CEOs do in the aftermath, vanish into silence, let PR handle the bleeding. But arrogance doesn't vanish. It fights. It thrashes. And when arrogance is desperate, it turns ugly. By noon, the headlines shifted. They weren't just about the failure anymore. They were about me. Fired engineer sabotaged Helios system, CEO claims. Rogue architect accused of locking out company. Whistleblower or traitor? My name was everywhere. My face too. He'd handed the media a neat little narrative. I was bitter. I was angry. I wanted revenge, so I had booby-trapped the system and watched it implode. The first time I saw it on the screen, my stomach dropped. I had braced for failure. I had braced for arrogance. I had not braced for this. The phone rang within minutes. It was my mother. Her voice shook, though she tried to keep it steady. "Honey, I just saw the news. They're saying you sabotaged the company. Is it true?" I closed my eyes, rubbed my forehead, and whispered, "No, Mom. It isn't true." But it didn't matter what I said. The world had already chosen sides. And I'll ask you this, right here, be honest. If you had to choose, who would you believe? The CEO in a sharp suit speaking on national television, or the fired architect sitting in a cluttered apartment. Would you believe the CEO or me? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Jonathan doubled down. He staged evidence. Screenshots of doctored emails. Snippets of server logs, edited to make it look like I had slipped in malicious code. He gave the press glossy graphics, a villain story with my name stamped in bold letters. The networks ate it up. Sabotage sells better than incompetence. I tried to ignore the TV, but the phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Old friends texted. Some cautious, some blunt. Did you really do it? Reporters called nonstop, leaving messages asking for my side of the story. But the one that cut deepest wasn't a text or a headline. It was a call from a number I knew too well. Ethan, the deputy I had once trusted like family. When I answered, his voice was low, almost apologetic. Sophia, you need to come clean. People think you destroyed everything. I laughed bitterly. You know better. You tried to bypass the protections yourself. You know exactly why the system shut down. He didn't deny it. He just sighed. Truth doesn't matter anymore. Perception does. And right now, perception says you're guilty. The line went dead. That night, the apartment felt smaller than ever. I sat at the table, the same contract page in front of me, the clause highlighted, proof in black and white. I knew the truth. But truth doesn't shout. Lies do. For the first time, I wondered if maybe Jonathan would win, not because he was right, but because he had the louder microphone. But then, out of nowhere, the tide turned. I woke to a flood of messages. Not from reporters. Not from family. From inside Helios. Someone had leaked a file bundle into the internal Slack. Dozens of documents. Raw emails. Logs. Metadata. And every line proved the same thing. Jonathan had staged the evidence. He had ordered the forgery himself. He had built the lie he fed the world. The name attached to the leak? Ethan. The same man who had told me perception mattered more than truth. Maybe his conscience caught up. Maybe he realized he was next on Jonathan's chopping block. I didn't know. I didn't care. All I cared was that the truth finally had a voice louder than his lies. Within minutes, the board knew. The employees knew. Screenshots of the Slack post hit Twitter, then Reddit, then the news. By afternoon, the story flipped. Helios CEO accused of forging evidence. Internal leak shreds company's official narrative. Jonathan Price under fire. The same reporters who paraded his story the day before now circled like wolves, demanding answers. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Directors shouted at each other. Some accused him of betraying them, others tried weakly to defend him, but the room was split wide open. His credibility wasn't cracked anymore. It was shattered. I sat in my apartment, watching it unfold live, glass of wine in hand. Relief washed through me, slow and heavy. Not joy, just relief. The kind that comes when someone else finally says out loud what you've been screaming silently for days. 2 days later, my phone rang again. But this time, it wasn't a worried family member. It wasn't a reporter. It wasn't Ethan. It was the board. The company needs you back, the voice on the line said. Today, I almost laughed. The same board that had let Jonathan fire me without a word now begged for my return. I went. Not for them, but for me. I needed to see it with my own eyes. When I walked into the boardroom, the air was thick. No staged smiles. No buzzwords. Just fear. Papers scattered across the table, half-drunk cups of coffee gone cold. Directors sat stiff, eyes darting anywhere but at me. Jonathan was there, too, standing against the wall. No tie this time. His hair messy, his eyes red. He didn't look like a leader. He looked like a cornered animal. The board chair cleared his throat. Carter, thank you for coming. Helios is collapsing. Investors are leaving. Customers are gone. Only you can restore the system. We're prepared to make you an offer. A folder slid across the table. I opened it. The words jumped out in bold: executive power equal to the CEO, double salary, veto authority over all technical decisions. In other words, they wanted to crown me co-CEO, the savior of Helios. Before I could speak, Jonathan exploded. His voice cracked, but the fury was real. This is insane. She sabotaged us. She set this up. And now you want to hand her the throne. I didn't even look at him. I looked at the board, my voice steady and cold. He's right about one thing, I said. I hold power, but not because I sabotaged anything. Because I built this system with my blood and my time. Because I signed the contracts none of you ever read. Because I saw this day coming when you didn't. The room went silent. Some flushed with shame. Others just stared. Jonathan clenched his fists, shaking, but he had nothing left. I closed the folder and pushed it back. You think you can buy me with titles and money, I said. But there's one thing you can't buy. Truth. And truth is not for sale to Helios. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. The kind of silence that makes every breath sound too loud. I stood. My chair scraped back slowly. I turned and walked out. The echo of my footsteps filled the corridor like a drumbeat. I didn't look back. Funny thing, days ago, they tossed me out like trash. Today, they begged me to be their savior. But I knew the truth. I wasn't theirs anymore. And now I'll ask you, because I think we've all dreamed of this moment. If you were in my shoes, standing at that table, folder in hand, what would you do? Would you take the crown, or would you walk? Comment below. I want to hear your truth. 2 days after I walked out of that boardroom for the last time, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line: invitation to discuss strategic alignment. Sender: Ardent Dynamics. The timing was too perfect. Helios was burning down, smoke visible from every corner of the industry. And here was Ardent, their longtime rival, extending a hand. I wasn't naive. They weren't reaching out of kindness. This was opportunity dressed up as courtesy. But still, I opened the message. The body was short, polite, sharp. We understand the current situation. If you're willing, we'd like to meet in person. Contact: Chris Dalton. My heart caught when I saw the name. Chris Dalton. I remembered him. He had once been one of us, a senior engineer at Helios. Fired long before me, not for incompetence, but for defiance. He had dared to stand in a meeting and tell Jonathan Price he was driving the company off a cliff. Jonathan, of course, had thrown him out. And now here he was on the other side of the battlefield. We met at a quiet cafe near the Embarcadero, the kind of place where tech deals go down quietly, away from curious ears. The smell of espresso clung to the air, grinders whining under jazz that nobody really listened to. Chris was already there, spinning a coffee cup in his hand like he always used to. A few new lines creased his face, but the grin was the same. Didn't think I'd see you here, Carter, he said. But I can't say I'm surprised. I told Jonathan years ago, if he ever cut you loose, he'd regret it. I sat across from him, folding my arms. Funny how things turn. He leaned forward, dropping the grin. His voice sharpened. Helios has lost control. We both know it. And we both know only one person can actually run that system. You. I'm here to ask if you're ready to turn your creation into something more. Something that belongs with people who value it. He slid a tablet across the table. The screen lit up with a document. My document. The same contract I'd buried years ago, the clause highlighted in yellow. In the event the project is terminated. The line burned bright. Jonathan has no idea, Chris whispered. But we do. I stared at him. And what do you want? He smiled. To work with you. To take what you built and give it the stage it deserves. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, my eyes locked on the screen. The contract scrolled down slowly, but Chris tapped the tablet and stopped it before the final page. The number, whatever it was, remained hidden. A curiosity loop. He knew exactly what he was doing. I leaned back, crossing my arms tighter. If you're trying to tempt me, Chris, you'll have to do better than hiding the punchline. His grin widened. Oh, I will. 2 days later, I walked into Arden's new headquarters. The building still smelled like fresh paint and carpet glue. Clean glass. Crisp light. No chaos here. No scrambling interns trying to hide failure. Just order. Chris led me up to the top floor, into a boardroom filled with warm golden light and leather chairs that didn't creak under pressure. On the table sat a thick folder. I opened it, and there it was. A single number printed in bold on the first page. $2.1 billion. For a moment, my breath caught. Seeing that figure attached to my work, my name, was almost surreal. Years of sacrifice, of missed birthdays, of living on caffeine and adrenaline, now reduced to ink on paper. But intoxicating as it was, I didn't let the number blind me. I looked up at Chris. You're not buying me. You're buying everything I built. And I don't just hand that away. His smile softened. Then tell us your terms. So I did. I won't be an employee. I won't be your figurehead. I'll be chief advisory architect with full authority to oversee how the tech is used. And if you misuse it, I keep the right to revoke. Chris arched a brow. You don't ask for small favors, do you? I didn't bleed for small favors, I said. For a long moment, the room was quiet. Then Chris leaned back, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. I should have known you wouldn't just take the money. You never did anything halfway. He slid the pen across the table. Deal. I picked it up. The ink bled dark blue across the page, my signature sharp and final. One line and the game changed. Chris extended his hand. I shook it firmly. His palm was warm, but in my mind, I said the words I couldn't out loud. The game doesn't run by Ardent. It runs by me. When I stepped out of the tower that evening, the San Francisco sunset turned the glass skyline to fire. I tilted my head back, let the wind brush across my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting to breathe. Jonathan had tried to erase me. Instead, I had written my name into history, inked into a deal worth $2.1 billion. The news broke the very next morning. Arden acquires Quantum Modular Grid in $2.1 billion deal. Helios loses core patent. Market reacts. Case study of the decade. Every outlet had the same story. Arden had just taken Helios's crown jewel. Helios's stock chart glowed red, plunging off a cliff. In 24 hours, they lost more than $10 billion in market value. Partners pulled contracts. Customers fled. Analysts shredded them in reports that would be taught in business schools for years. I sat in my apartment, glass of wine in hand, watching the coverage roll in. One headline lingered on the screen: Jonathan Price, worst CEO of the decade? I didn't laugh. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled. Justice didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like quiet inevitability. A week later, Jonathan held a press conference. I hadn't planned to watch, but curiosity won. The cameras flashed as he sat down at a long table, microphones crowding the space in front of him. He looked smaller. Tie loosened, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. A reporter shouted the question everyone wanted to ask. What do you have to say about losing your company's core patent to Ardent? Jonathan's throat bobbed. His voice rasped. That was an unforeseen oversight. A lapse in management. But we will recover. The room erupted in scoffs. Another reporter jumped in. You call a $2.1 billion loss an oversight? Did you even read the contracts before signing them? Flashes went off like lightning. Do you think it's time to resign? Someone shouted. Jonathan stammered. His face flushed red. His words tangled together into nonsense. And then the board chair leaned forward to the mic. His voice was steady cold. Jonathan Price will resign as CEO of Helios Systems, effective immediately. The room burst into noise. Reporters shouting. Cameras flashing. Jonathan slumped, eyes darting like a man searching for an exit that didn't exist. I switched off the TV. The silence that followed was almost soothing. Walking through Market Street that afternoon, I heard whispers. A group of young tech workers huddled outside a coffee shop, eyes wide as they scrolled their phones. "That's her," one of them whispered. "That's Sophia Carter, the one who toppled Helios." I didn't stop. I didn't turn. I just smiled softly. Because the truth was, I hadn't toppled anyone. Jonathan had toppled himself. I had just been patient enough to let the truth catch up. That night, sitting by my window with the city lights glowing, I thought back to the boardroom. To the folder slammed on the table. To the single word that had once ended me. Terminated. And to the 2 words I had given back. Thank you. Funny thing is, I meant it. Because sometimes thank you isn't surrender. Sometimes it's a promise. A warning. A seed planted in silence. So I'll leave you with this. If you've ever been dismissed, sidelined, or told you don't matter, remember this story. Your worth isn't decided in someone else's boardroom. It's written in what you build, in the persistence you carry, in the quiet confidence that truth will outlast arrogance. Helios lost 10 billion in value in a blink. Jonathan lost everything in 2 weeks. And me? I smiled. I said thank you. And I rewrote the ending on my own terms. We tell pure revenge stories here every week. So let me ask you, if you're not subscribed yet, what's holding you back? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to hear. Because only subscribers get the full story. Don't be left behind.